Hi, I'm Francis Hellier, and welcome to my brand new podcast, Metaverse. This is a podcast for the future-minded, a series for anyone on the hunt for the next big thing and all its possibilities and implications. This is Tomorrow's World Today. With each episode, I will chat to those at the top of their fields, from futurists in crypto and space travel to forecasters in business and tech. Together, we will ask the question, what's next? Today, I'm joined by Susan Cox-Smith, futurist, writer, and partner at Changeist. With vast experience as creative director, producer, and researcher, Susan has a keen interest in encouraging public engagement with future possibilities. Founded in 2007, Changeist works with global organizations to aid in their management of complex futures through research, sense-making, strategy, and engagement. During her time at the company, Susan has consulted on projects with businesses including Comcast, the International Federation of Red Cross, National Lottery Fund UK, and a variety of Silicon Valley companies. She has also been a contributing editor on How to Future, Leading in Sense-Making in an Age of Hyperchange, and written for publications such as How We Get to Next and The Next Web. Susan, it's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you for joining the Metaverse.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. So I'm keen to dive straight into your work at Changeist first and foremost. How was your experience consulting Silicon Valley companies, amongst others?
Well, we have worked with a huge variety of companies. I would say the Silicon Valley ones are very, very interesting because what we find is that they're very, very invested in the future that they make, but they don't think very much about the future that they're making. So it's an interesting dichotomy there that there's a strong belief that if they build something that it's good and that it will be successful in the world of the future. And so when we consult with those companies and many other companies as well, it's not just Silicon Valley, we really find that we want people to step back a little bit and to consider what the world will be for this thing that they are making to put into it. So it's kind of having a broader view of the world as a whole and not specifically about the product that they're developing because they can.
Of course, that makes a lot of sense. Now, what does the future hold for Silicon Valley in that way? Will they remain ahead of the curve or are they already falling behind?
My sense is that they're clearly ahead of the curve, and there's a lot of tech out there that is now being developed for good, which I view as being a very, very positive step. But that doesn't mean that things that already exist, and I won't mention anyone specifically, but some of the social media organizations who really again need to step back and think usefully about the future that they're putting forth for people. There's a really, really interesting film that just came out from Superflux called The Intersection that I think really points to a lot of those stresses that we're finding in social media and lots of technology use and everyone kind of being tied to screens all the time. And it makes an interesting social commentary on, where that might be heading and how that might change over time.
Now, your research is focused on the futures of personal transport and health and wellness. Could you tell us a little bit about some of your thoughts in these areas as well?
Well, personal transport is something that we did do a project on. We're actually involved in a much, much larger set of projects right now that are more about urban planning as a whole and designing cities that are future focused and future proof. So clearly mobility and personal transport have a really, really big impact on that. And one thing we have to discuss with our clients is, everyone thinks the city of the future will be either autonomous mobility or personal mobility and everything will be different. But we can't ignore the fact that cars, not self-driving cars, but just automobiles are going to be around for a little bit longer. So when you're designing cities, you want to think about them being adaptable to multiple modes of mobility, and that you want to be able to think about transitions. We often talk about how Horizon 2 is the interesting place where things go from how they are now to how they will be in the future. And it's a really nice Horizon 2 problem to think about.
Susan, at the start of the conversation, you said something really interesting about social media companies and how they plan their own futures, but not necessarily think about the damage or the direction of travel and the effect they have on all of us. Can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
I think it just points out that clearly social media companies need to think more carefully up front about, who your users are, what your platform looks like, how much control do you have over it? What are the rules, kind of just the ground rules going to be for social interaction going forward? And it's one of those, the horse is already out of the stable kind of problems, but I'd like to think that new social media companies are going to think more carefully and creatively about how they go forward and into the future.
Now, health has been a massive issue this past year, clearly due to the pandemic, but what influence has it had in fast forward in our futures?
Well, I think it's clearly pushed everyone, governments, human beings, organizations, corporations, to think about, what life is like in a world where pandemics are easily possible. It's funny because when the COVID pandemic first started, everybody talked about how it was a wild card or a black swan. And we were able to sort of point back and say, yes, but we've been seeing these trend reports for decades now saying every year that we don't have a pandemic, the likelihood of having one is that much higher. So there were a lot of the, say, development organizations around the world who were saying pandemics are going to be incredibly, incredibly dangerous, and we need to be thoughtful about how we, plan for these kinds of situations. So a lot of people were left holding the bag because there was no plan. But I think what that means going forward, particularly in terms of, global health, is that more people will think about that, and they'll also reconsider the sort of, do we keep work from home? Do we let people live remotely wherever they want to live and still work for a company? Can you live in a van and travel around the world and still be able to stay on with your, your corporate job? There are a lot of considerations that are kind of on the table right now. And I'm really, really hoping that as we go forward, that health question becomes like a really centered part of the discussion.
Susan, you also look at entertainment, arts, and culture as well. Can you delve into some of those ideas too?
Yeah, we've done some really interesting projects in 2020 and 2021 that were very specifically about the future of arts and culture in going forward in kind of both climate change and pandemic universes. And the one was very specifically UK based. We worked with some really great people from the National Gallery and Serpentine and Watershed. So very much sort of contemporary digital types of art, different kinds of entertainment, really looking at, what will audiences be like? What will the experience be like? How will things change in terms of, having to always think about how many people you can have in the room, what's actually possible, and what is the experience perhaps of doing something remotely. And it was very, very informative. And I think there will be a report coming out about that shortly. We also did a more global project that spoke to curators, directors, performance venue directors, artists, musicians, about how they are thinking about the work that they do in a world where the entire idea of performance and audiences and funding and venues are just all now on the table again for all the possibilities for change.
Exciting times. I think the shared experience, shall we say, we've all been through is such a catalyst for innovation, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're seeing a lot of people having some very forward-thinking thoughts and also sort of creative and out of the box thoughts about, what does it mean to have a museum now? We always try to point to things like, Punch Drunk and Meow Wolf and some of these more experiential types of opportunities and how things, how those have had to shift in a time of, how many people can you have in a room, but also what does an experience actually mean, and how do people think of that differently now, in terms of, where they want to go, who they want to be with, and how they want to interact.
We've all sort of become futurists in a particular way now, haven't we? And
Yes.
epidemiologists as well, because we all know about R numbers and all manner of different things we've learned through this shared experience. I'm interested to learn how you started looking at the future in the first place. What inspired you and sparked your interest in that?
I kind of came into it laterally, sort of through the side door. I started as a designer, so I was both a print and exhibition designer. Worked a lot with the furniture industries, as well as custom publications and annual reports. So, my work was very sort of problem/solution based. And then I started working with my partner at Changeist, Scott Smith, and he felt that, I had a different way of looking at things, because I'm clearly not an academically trained futurist. But it was very interesting for me to come in and work on projects to research and also sort of think about how to talk to people about the future, because as a designer, that was very much kind of the space that I worked in. So I work more on the side of kind of the experience of futures, whether that's doing a workshop and, creating the material and content for teaching people about futures, or whether that was creating things like prototypes and speculative artifacts that people could engage with and ask questions about, and kind of put them into a future that they might not be expecting, or might be surprising, or particularly, interesting or frightening, and how to kind of turn the dials up and down on those types of projects that, we felt like people were getting the benefit out of engaging with a particular future, so that they could more creatively think about what was possible in that future.
Now, you mentioned the workshops, and I know you recently held a workshop on feminist futures, and specifically around the role of COVID in that. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yes, absolutely. That was one of my favorite projects of all time. I was tasked with developing a workshop that could be facilitated by non-experts to help, more specifically, women in the global South with considering the impacts of COVID and how that might change perceptions and ideas and new paths for feminism in the post-COVID era. And I had the wonderful opportunity to work with five other women futurists from all around the world, everywhere from Australia and Bangkok, the United States, here in The Hague with where I am. And that was, we had this great opportunity to build something that was very supportive of the International Women's Development Agency in Melbourne, Australia, to bring cohorts of women together and discuss these possible impacts on feminist futures.
Great stuff. Let's be honest, it's only the ladies that are going to save the world. Can't leave it to the guys. It's not going to happen. Now, you also work with leaders from organizations like Microsoft and Netflix, and well, it's got all these big names, NASA JPL. How do you find that?
It's great. I mean, generally, these are the most amazing people, and they're so invested in, learning about how we do our process, so that, they can take that back into their work and into their teams and really, find the benefits of thinking about the future in terms of the work that they're doing. So one of the things about writing How to Future that we really wanted to get across was that it wasn't an academic tome. It wasn't, we're here to create more futurists. The idea was to instill a futuring mindset into people who wanted to think about the future productively and creatively, and incorporate that into their day-to-day work.
And so how does leadership need to adapt in this really ever-changing environment that seems to get crazier and crazier by the day. Change is happening so quickly now. It's hard to keep up with it. How does leadership need to adapt?
Well, I think I'd like to see leadership consider more carefully their goals. And I don't just mean financial goals or, global scaling goals, but the overall picture of what is considered, health, wellness, and prosperity. I mean, we work with a lot of governments. We work with the UK government. We work with governments in the UAE and as well as in the US. And it's very, very interesting to see that both governmental leadership and corporate leadership are starting to take a little bit more of that step back and looking out ahead and thinking, where do we want to be in 20 years rather than, how much money can we make by selling X thing to every person on the planet. So I think there are definitely pockets of this where people are starting to take a more critical eye on, what the future could be like and how they might contribute to making that better or worse.
Would you say you're optimistic about the future or pessimistic?
We do the Pollock game a lot in some of our workshops as sort of an icebreaker, and that's a game where you choose whether you're optimistic or pessimistic about the future, and then
you realize you're the opposite.
Exactly. But then the second step of the game is to choose whether you feel that you have agency in that future or if you have less agency in that future. And so I always end up kind of putting myself in the optimistic range, but not in either the agency or lack of agency. So I'm kind of right in the middle on that. And so I am definitely optimistic. I'm just not sure how much of an influence I personally or how much agency I have in that future.
So here at Metaverse, we're always on the hunt for the next big thing. That's what I say at the opening of each recording. What would you say the next big things are? And where do you see things in the next 10 years?
Wow, that's actually a hard question for me, but
not to put you on the spot or anything.
Well, I think we're going to be in a time of really dramatic change. I feel like the next 10 years is a literal horizon too. Like many, many things will be growing and changing. Many, many things will be dying off. I think the problem is knowing which of those things are going in which direction, because there's a lot of things that could get a whole lot better. But they may not, because there are, powers in place that don't allow that to happen. Again, I'm optimistic about the future, and I'm really, really interested because I don't want to make any guesses about, what that more positive future might be.
Because in 10 years' time, I'll have you back on. I'll be old and gray.
All right.
And then we can, that's why I'm asking you, so we can see whether your predictions came true or not.
Absolutely. Well, I will tell you that to us, prediction is a dirty word. We don't use that because we don't predict the future. We forecast the future, and we think we imagine the possibilities, but we are not salesmen or salespeople for the future. So, we're just here to.
So no. So you don't have a crystal. There's no crystal ball. Oh, I'm really disappointed now.
I know it's so sad, and so many people are. I can't tell you how many workshops we've been in where somebody's like, "No, you just need to tell me what the future is going to be," and we have to say that's just not our job.
Well, listen, what does the future hold for you personally, then, Susan?
I feel like my future looks very, very bright. We have had a really amazing year at Changeist. We've also started a second company called Anaglyph, where we are actually working to develop some documentaries and fictional programs and podcasts that look at the future, that think about the future. And it's really become kind of an interesting and fun side hustle to write about all the things that we've seen in the futuring world, and in the corporate environment, and kind of dramatize that and fictionalize that and just have some fun with it.
Well, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time, Susan.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
You've been listening to Metaverse with me, Francis Hellier. Thank you to my guest, Susan Cox-Smith, for a great conversation. Tweet us at MetaversePod with any suggestions or feedback. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please do share a link on social media. You can sign up to receive an email when a new episode drops at our website, metaverse.fm.